We should embrace chaos. That's what I force you to. And whatever I present in here, please open your mind and think about it differently. This is a guy I really, really love, Buckminster Fuller, famous architect, did amazing buildings. Check him out if you don't know him. And he actually said, in order to change an existing paradigm, you do not struggle to try and change the problematic model. You create a new model and make the old one obsolete. Do you like that? Do you like that quote? Does it make sense? Is it rubbish? Who says it makes sense? Please raise a hand. Nobody says it makes sense. Okay. It makes sense. Raise a hand if you like it. Do you know what? I don't like it. I like the guy, but I don't like the statement. And I would actually put it up in flames. Sorry, Bucky. Because I mean, we always live in very fast-moving and changing times, right? That's like, hey, everything is quicker now because of digital, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, was always like that. But the more important questions for companies right now, when it comes to leadership, is, do we really need a different type of leadership? Is that really something that we have to change? Like, we can talk about the Zappos example, like holacracy. Let's throw in some buzzwords. And, I look at that stuff as well, and I like it. But the question is that really the kind of model that we need? And I have brought you actually 3 examples because I looked at different leadership models in different organizations. And let's have a look, for example, into the where's scene. The where's scene, or actually mostly referred to as the scene, is an underground community of people that specialize in the distribution of copyrighted material, including television shows and series, movies, music videos, yada, yada. I'm sorry, because it says movies, etc., and there are some producers in here, so you're gonna probably slap me, but it's not about the illegal content. I'm looking at the leadership structure in there. Famous quote from Wikipedia, by the way. What most people don't know, that the scene itself, that where's scene, actually is hidden. They don't want to be recognized. And I'm not saying because out of legal reasons, I'm saying that because they don't want attention, not because of legal reasons, because their motivation is actually quite different. But more about that in a second. The important part is that you keep in mind that the original intent is to share those achievements only within their scene, within their peers. They're not doing that to the outside world originally. And the terminology is interesting because famous old school Iron Man 3 that you see here. Is that legal if we film that? I'm not sure. It's like 20 seconds or so. Do you know what this actually means? Yeah. What does it mean? It was shot from the cinema. Happily, you're not on the picture there, so you're anonymous in there, whoever said that. I know you. It was actually recorded in the cinema. And do you know what this means? Telesync. Oh, well, we have some pros in here. It's actually hooked up to the projector of the cinema, and you have a better image quality. Then there's also a screener, etc., an R5. I'm not going into any details in there. WebDL, etc. A BD rip. Just look about the naming of a file that you usually receive. And then you add suddenly something like X264, which is the codec, or the audio codec, .AAC, and minus device, which is the Where's group who actually released that. Great that you learned that, but why the fuck is actually Axel telling you that crap? It's quite simple, because it is regulated. Again, my German behavior and financial yada yada are like regulated things and they have to be in place, etc. Actually, you have a website and all of the regulatories are documented and with most of the stuff, it's quite old stuff. So if they once defined that, it is set in stone and everybody is doing that. That sounds like the typical organization, right? Set in stone. You do that for 20 years and you never change it. And you like it, right? Probably not. I'm not sure about you, but I don't like rules in general. And even more, if you look into one of those papers, I'm not allowed, because of the camera, to actually go there. I would otherwise point. But I can extract that. This is the document, one of the 40, 50 documents that you have seen previously, where every tiny thing is documented. And you can see that there is the release date and how you should name that file, up to its tiny detail. And this is the document in full size with all the details. And they have that for every kind of thing. And they even have rules. If they publish that internally, whoever has minutes after the movie is released, published it within the internal crowd, they have that platform where they communicate that. And it has some rules because whoever does that first, nobody else will do it again because it's done. The only exception is that if you have actually done bad quality or a mistake, somebody can do a so-called dupe and can bring out something that is better, right? And you have some rules about it. You see the nuke, for example, and the exceptions on when to post a nuke and post a new file, etc. That's all on IRC chat still. And this is a document, for example, if you downloaded a movie by a group called setPanda, you can actually see the description on all the different technological patterns of that file, etc. So again, imagine they don't get paid for that. It's a strong hierarchical thing. Why do they actually do that in a very, very efficient way? Because if you have to publish something within a 5-minute range because before somebody else does that, you have to be quite efficient, right? So let's look at hierarchy of that organization. And that's not the famous, super famous, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, Skid Row metal band. It's actually one of the release groups who called themselves Skid Row. And they say, keep in mind, we do all this because we can do and because we like the thrilling excitement of winning over the other competing groups. So again, no money in here, but we're just better than you. And we like the competition. And if you look at the hierarchy, you have the release groups, you actually have the top sites, and by the way, release groups, those are the ones who actually bring out the file. And it usually stays in the release groups. If there is a leak, which means somebody claims it somehow, it ends up in a top site. A top site is an FTP server or something like that, where they upload the file and share it to others. So this might be the super critical moment where an end customer actually has access to the file, but usually people don't have access to a top site. It's very, very difficult to get access to that. Then you have the couriers from that top site. They don't belong to them, but they claim the files and they spread that to somewhere else. Then you have the sites, which is usually like a Pirate Bay or anything like that. And then you have the people, the leechers, which might be us, who take the file. And that hierarchy, when it comes to leadership, is interesting. It is super organized, super organized, but it's still totally anarchy because it's not a company who pays you or anything like that. It's actually people who come together who probably don't know each other, who work very systematically, very efficient with each other, and bring something like that to market. And if we see at if we look at our organizations, how can we motivate people actually on acting like that? That they're so efficient with so strict rules. I think that's very, very tough to beat. Wow. The question is, who are those kind of people who are part of that organization? Like the nerdy pickle, no, not, what's the word? the hacker kind of, I don't know, person. What kind of person do you have in mind who's part of that group? Kids? Kids? You said kids, yes, yeah. Anybody else? Got an idea? Every type of person? Oh, I see some finger pointing here. I'm not revealing who. One person that got busted was the warehouse leader of a famous group, and he used to be the chairman of San Diego Republican Party. Up for interpretation, but I think it's kind of funny. It's not a kid, at least. Again, keep in mind, this is a very hierarchical thing. While the second leadership organization that I'm looking at is actually the Darknet. Who of you knows what the Darknet is? So I see more people. I see more people. We're getting shady here. It's actually something very creative and possibly positive, because it's a decentralized alternative to traditional digital communication networks, as I would define it. So basically, it's not part of the World Wide Web. And it's something, if you take the origin of the World Wide Web, which used to be behind some, financed by military, done by some universities, etc., is a very independent thing, and it's not that complicated. It sounds complicated, but what you basically do what you can do, you can create an alternative to global digital information infrastructure, free from state-owned telecommunications companies or the private sector, etc., etc. I think that is important if you, for example, look at some telcos who want to force like a net neutrality, that you're only allowed to give certain information access or priority. Could be your own streaming service, etc., whoever pays the most. This is an alternative because you give people access without a regulation. And the terminology, I think it's more easy if you want to test that out. It's doesn't matter which browser you're actually using. There's a dedicated application, but you can also download a plugin called the Tor plugin. And when you install that, you actually have access to the Darknet. You don't have to be a super pro. You can download it, you click it, and it actually gives you access to the Darknet, because it basically, everybody who's joining that network is making up the connection to a server, which is probably in someone's living room, I don't know. So you have those, how do you now find websites if you don't have a Google or something like that, right? Because you're there in the Darknet. And there are some things called hidden wikis. And in a hidden wiki, it's like a Wikipedia, let's say, but it has all the different Darknet servers listed. And if you have to figure out that yourself, what is the address for a hidden wiki, etc., and then you have all the different topics in there. And it's uncensored. And these are some, I think, very old addresses for those servers. And you can see that it's a freedom of speech conversation. I mean, I'm not lying here. It is not regulated. There's everything on there, right? I mean, like everything. And it's not regulated. So it's up to you what you actually make out of it. So what kind of things, because if you read the news, it was within the last 2 years, I think the terminology Darknet popped up a little more often. And it was always against very, 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 very bad things. Like, this happened on the Darknet. In its nicest form, you could order your drugs through the Darknet by mail delivery to your doorstep. In its nicest form in the communication, but it gives a lot of more creative possibilities, and I'm going to show you some in a second. So the hierarchy of a Darknet is total chaos, not regulated. But the interesting part is, if you look at some of the platforms, no matter if you buy your drugs there or anything else, it is the most amazing e-commerce experience I've ever seen. They're so far ahead of an Amazon when it comes to, like in the beginning, like a karma system, feedback system. Do you like our service? First on the Darknet, right? So the creativity in there and the service layer is amazing. Do you already think I'm totally bananas what I'm saying here? Or I told you, you should be open-minded and think about things differently and where you observe and where you look at things. And I did a similar presentation like that towards a large financial institution. So they're open for that as well. Now, one of our clients. It's interesting when you look at the imagery without a sound even, it already starts like shady business happening here. Someone like in the back corner is doing something, and it's actually only showing the shocking content there. And it's organized as well with administrators, moderators, vendors, consumers, etc. So whenever you have a service website, it's organized as a company. And some of them actually make money if you compare it to the previous example, large money, if they're not jailed up. But I think from a creative perspective, it is interesting. This is somehow, it's publicly available. Are you familiar with 4chan? Some, it's pretty old school, it's nothing new, it's nothing super fancy. But it is interesting because the things, and I'm sure even without a sound, you know the examples that I'm going to show you in a second, because this came out of 4chan. And I think as a creative source, it is amazing what you get out of there and how inspirational it can be. There's, I think this is a 4chan, very old 4chan question. So somebody on 4chan actually asked, what is 4chan? And the answer is, I need a logical, first the question, I need a logical explanation of what it is and what happened to it, please and thank you. And somebody's answering, it's a forum image board where almost everyone is anonymous. They're behind most of the Scientology raids and videos and cause general chaos and mayhem on the internet. The site is loaded with, and I advise you not to go there. Great answer. The most popular image board is random, which is 4chan.org/b, and that's why everyone always says go B or back or back to home base, sorry. The culture is incredibly complex and it's very hard to explain. And it goes further with the rules because you're originally not allowed to talk about that you know what B is, the so-called random board. And they do have a rule set as well, because the rule number 1 is do not talk about B. The rule number 2 is do not talk about B. The rule number 8, I skipped a couple ones, there are no real rules about posting. Rule 20, nothing is to be taken seriously. Rule 31, I censored that, or get the fuck out, the choice is yours. Rule 36 is there's always more fucked up shit than what you just saw. Rule 38, no real limits of any kind apply here, not even the sky. Rule 42, nothing is sacred. Things that arose out of B is that political party, which you probably heard of, Anonymous, that is something that actually arose out of 4chan. Because originally everybody posts anonymous there, and this is where that movement actually came from. But I told you there's other stuff that arose out of 4chan, very creative stuff, like those cat pictures. Probably your most beloved parents sent you that funny stuff in a presentation or whatever. Sometimes this is stuff that came out of 4chan. And also be happy that neither video, let's try again, or sound is working, because what's originally seen here is the neon cat, you know, that funny rainbow cat with a tail and the endless loop. That was actually done out of 4chan. On the other hand side, a song like Chocolate Rain was done through 4chan. And this was at a certain time one of the most successful single songs on iTunes. I don't know for how long, for a couple of days, a week, or a month, I don't know. Most successful out of 4chan. So you see how much great creativity actually comes out of 4chan for ideation if you read between the lines. The leadership styles, as I said, it's highly controversial, and as I said, I'm not glorifying everything that is in there. There's some really bad stuff actually happening in there. I'm not judging it, but you can find a lot of creativity, and it's an amazing place to check out and very easy for you as well. The last one is not the Catholic Church, I'm sorry. It is actually flat organizations, and this is more or less a term that is popping up the last years within organization, like, hey, let's do another Zappos who's doing holacracy models, etc. I'm not talking about Zappos. I'm actually talking about a different company, but by its basic definition, it means that you have a flat hierarchy. No matter what company size you have, a flat hierarchy, not those 20 pillars up to the king of the world, etc. So how can you keep it as small and lean as possible? And if we look at a hierarchy like that, do we have any company in mind who's doing that since a long time already? Google. I'm not sure if they're so flat. I'm talking about super flat, like a line. Wikipedia, well, Wikipedia has a strong hierarchy. Actually, if you want to publish there something, you can do it immediately, but people will fix it and will blame you and change it and not and take back the release, etc. No, it's strongly hierarchical. Netflix is kind of going into that direction. Okay, I'm not going to bug you any longer. The company that I'm talking about is Valve. I never pronounced it right, I think, but anyway. They did games like Half-Life, which you probably know. Yes, exactly. And not only games, we also have a setup box, basically streaming and offering like a flat rate for games, etc. They're quite successful with that, not only with their games, but with their games offering. And they released something which is still out there in the wild. You can download it. It's the Valve Handbook for New Employees. It's an amazing document, and I think they published that already 7, 8 years ago. And it basically says, when it comes to company structure, this is taken out of that handbook, it's only a line. There's no hierarchy. Now you're asking me, why is there one dot actually popping out, right? It's quite easy. Doesn't matter if you're 10 years in your job, 5 years, 1 year, 250, I don't know. If you're the king of the world or the new intern, you're in that line. And everybody in that company can actually say, I got this idea. I want to start a team on that. Which is great. You pop out that line and people join you. Which is also the difficult part, right? Because everybody can do that. And if everybody can do that, whom are you actually going to join? Best idea, most famous person, most influential person? I don't know. But they have that structure since a long, long time in place. And it is interesting because they also say, they encourage you. This is one of the founders, and I took that from the Washington Post. They interview people like how adaptable they actually are. And we all know you have certain, and what do you want to achieve? What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And we all have excuses, no matter in what circumstance in life you are, that you actually say like, hey, I just got a family or this and that. Got a family myself, by the way, so I take it as an excuse on purpose. But they say, hey, it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of time. And we will go over that, but where do you want to be? Where do you want to go and where do you want to grow, no matter in what circumstance you're in? And they encourage you to adapt to whatever comes next. And I heard it before. You all said, or I heard at least some of you said, like, we're searching for the next, we're not that super happy, etc. Isn't that great that a company, I've not been part of Valve, so I'm trying to repeat the myth, is actually really encouraging you and pushing you and really making it painful probably for you to go into that direction. I'm not only talking positive about it, I have another example why I think it's not so positive in a second. And again, it repeats here, where do you want to be in 10 years? As I said, I do have an example in there which is not as positive, because a couple of years, nobody actually left the company. I don't know about your rotation of employees within your company. If you're a freelancer, it's a different game, but anyway. But imagine a couple of years, and I'm not talking about 10 people there, I'm talking already about hundreds of people. Nobody left that company until the first employee actually left and gave a big interview in 2013 and said like, wow, the flat structure actually leads to clicks. So it's like, for me, it's like when I think about it, it's like a high school game, right? Who's the most popular person who steps up and it's like, hey, I got that great idea, join me. And then like, how can you actually keep the people on your side that they're actually your team member and not somebody else who's more popular or in its best case has the better idea, is not dragging the people away from you. I mean, I think that's very stressful actually to handle that. And this is the first employee who actually broke the silence and left the company and was complaining about it. As we all know, when people mostly leave, they're not happy about it most of the times. So I don't know about the truth in there, but it is interesting to see what happened after a couple of years. So I don't believe that there is truly a structureless organization or a very flat hierarchy. I don't believe it. And there are similar examples like, I mean, GitHub was bought by Microsoft, where you actually, a company where you can store your code and share your code. They were a distributed company, no office, etc., flat hierarchy. You can read a lot of examples out there where you can actually see people criticizing it after a couple of years as well. I don't know how the gig is now with Microsoft, but I don't believe it truly exists. So to repeat again, and as I said, I want you to look differently. I don't give you an answer, and Jam said that to you before, but we can't give you answers. It's more a question what you take out of it. But if you actually look at those three examples, again, if I join a company and they say like our current product or service is not working anymore because of X, Y, Z, company structure, we now have to do a holacracy model or flat organizational structure, whatever it would be, because it's the latest hype. It's always the question, where do you look at? How do you see advantages for a company when it comes to the leadership structure and organizational structure? And where are its benefits? As you can see, with a where scene, it's very traditional, but very efficient. If I wouldn't have written on top where scene and would have said company, large company XYZ, you would probably have said like, fucking hell, that's not working anymore, that's so old school, etc. But there are some examples, not only within the where scene, where this is still working quite well. So we have to be actually sensitive on that. While on the Darknet, the traditional to innovative exists, it's highly anarchistic actually. And I would question that things like a flat organization are really as good as they seem. I assume that you're here because you want to do a change. But again, I'm questioning if that is really necessary at some points, because maybe you're in a great organization and the way how you communicate that and how you embrace that is wrong. Instead of building flying rockets, maybe it's not, maybe you have to do that. And then it's a question, how can you accelerate that? How can you get people excited? How can you differentiate from others, etc., etc.? But keep that in mind for the next days, because hopefully, not only within the 3 days, but later on, you build something out of that that is crucial for your next step in your career or for your organization. Yeah. I think I'm done with the timing. I hope you had fun with the presentation, and please, I'm around anyway for the next days. So just grab me if you have further questions, because I want to give time to my colleague, which is currently outside, I think. All right.